during the heat, during the peak heat periods of ripening. So a combination of these two factors are really key in the production of especially Pinot Noir, which is a very sensitive grape to heat.
I know it's such a hard grape to grow, but it seems like you guys have mastered it. I know Peter's been a very, very big proponent of it. It seems like it's the perfect place that it grows right there in Hermanus at you guys' winery. So
yes, I think experience is another factor that also is key in the production of good Pinot Noir. So we're fortunate to have this climate together with the soils. The soil types that we mostly have in the area is a clay-rich Bockerfeld shale, and it's quite a common soil type in South Africa, but then very far from the coast with very low rainfall area. So we're fortunate to have those two factors play in our favor, but then experience is something that also goes a long way in producing good wines. So yeah, fortunate to have Peter and a few other people in the valley that's been working with this varietal and are very open to conversation.
Can you give us a virtual tour of the cellar? So like, what kind of aging vessels are you guys using? What kind of press do you use? Just kind of give us a day-to-day rundown.
Okay, so the winery is actually fairly small. We produce only about maximum 300 tons. But what works very well in our favor is that with this big varietal spread that we have, the time of ripening and the time of picking allows us to bring in this, the amount of fruit that we do for the size of winery that we have. We ferment mostly in stainless steel, and that varies in open top fermenters where we practice punch downs, and then also closed vessels for pump overs. So both red and white in stainless steel fermenters. Then in oak, we ferment a lot of Chardonnay in oak. So the whole Kaimansgat and Missionville wooded range of Chardonnays are fermented in oak. French oak of 2 different coopers. And then we have 2 400-liter terracotta Manetti Amphora, which are fairly recent additions. 2018 was the first year we fermented in that. And we use that as a component in our Chardonnays, in our wooded Chardonnays. We can come to that a little bit later, but essentially those are the fermentation vessels. And then you asked about presses. I think it's very important, the way that you press. And yeah, the techniques. We have pneumatic presses, bag presses. But when it comes to the red wines, we essentially mimic a basket press. A basket press has got a lot of advantages, but one of the disadvantages is that it's fairly small and time consuming. So we imitate the basket press with our bag presses. So we do very little rotation during pressing of the reds. And then we also, we press the Chardonnays whole bunch, which also is very useful with the new modern presses that have big doors so you can load it easily. So some of the, depending on what we're trying to achieve, some of the presses are loaded whole bunch from the top, and then something like Sauvignon Blanc, we remove the berries from the stems and we axial feed it into the side of the press, where you can fit larger volumes and exclude as much oxygen as possible. So we have 2 presses, and then we use a very small bag press when we press our Riesling, our sticky Riesling, but more of that later.
I can't wait for the Riesling. Riesling is so diverse. I just can't wait to pick your brain about that. Let's see. Can you describe the characteristics of Pinot Noir? Just because this is also meant to be part of our Blacc Study group. And so we're studying like Pinot Noir right now, Chardonnay and Riesling. So like, can you just tell me a little bit about Pinot, because Pinot is not everybody's best friend.
No, it's not. Exactly. No, Pinot Noir it's got a lot of analogies, it's got a lot of nicknames, but I find it easier to liken, to give the wine a personality, or liken it to a person, and then you start to understand the varietal better. And the characteristic, or the person that I liken the wine to is a celebrity actor, where the varietal is demanding, it's highly strung, and it improves with experience. You know, your experienced actors, you know, over time, get to reflect the script very accurately. So that in a nutshell is how I see Pinot Noir. And the reason I say this is it is demanding. It really needs your full attention, both during the growing season, actually more importantly during the growing season, but also in the cellar. And it reflects the script. So it reflects the site where it is, and it reflects the condition that it is. If it's happy, it will show it. And if it's not, it won't. So, you know, there's very little midway for Pinot Noir. If it's good, it's really good, and if it's not, then it's typically quite poor. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. That makes perfect sense. Can you just really quickly think of a year, a vintage that's been better than another vintage? Or how do you think this vintage 2020 is going to turn out?
Certainly, we've actually been very fortunate to be in a good run when it comes to vintage conditions. From 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, they were all better than average. Dry vintages, which is really key during Pinot Noir. You want a cool and dry growing season, especially towards the end, with Pinot Noir being a very thin-skinned, tight-bunched cultivar. You don't need a lot of excess moisture during the final phases of the ripening period. And 2014 was a challenging vintage in that sense, where we had a lot of rain midway through the picking of the Pinot Noir. And 2020 had some aspects of that, where it was quite a moist vintage, not quite in such large volumes as we had in 2014, but there were continuous bouts of rain which interrupted the ripening of the varietal. And the timing of the pick is very crucial in Pinot Noir. The picking window, especially in South Africa with our warmer climate, is much smaller than many other varietals. So I would say 2020 is still a little bit early to say. I'm very happy how fermentation has progressed and what the wines are looking like at this stage. But the exact date of picking was quite challenging during 2020, more so than, for example, 19 and 17, which were near perfect conditions.
Now, when you say South Africa specifically, do you mean that because sometimes this weather is so bipolar, so sometimes the weather can just spike up really hot? One day it can be cold, the next day it can be super hot, the next day it could be cold. Is that what you mean, those spikes in the temperature?
Yes, definitely heat spikes, certainly. But on average, our climate is warm rather than, or hot rather than warm in an international context. So we have to work with our microclimates in the vineyards and cropping levels, you know, to moderate those factors.
And what about, you had mentioned that the berries or the clusters were like tightly bunched together. So that makes it very susceptible to botrytis. Do you guys do any sweet or dessert wines with your Pinot Noir?
No, we don't. At this stage, we don't have enough Pinot Noir really for the demand on the wines. So we essentially try and keep everything as healthy as possible. But on that note, we are in experimental phase with a sticky, with a vine dried straw wine styled wine, but that is based on Riesling. So it's very small volume, and it's potentially not a commercial venture, but it's not a botrytized product, but we do dry about a ton of Riesling every year that we press and we've been aging. So this is the third vintage that we've made it, and we're looking at putting something together this year.
Oh, I can't wait. I hope I'm on that special VIP list. Let's see. Let's talk about Chardonnay. First, let's see if anybody has any questions about Pinot Noir before we move on to Chardonnay. If you have any questions, just like raise your hand and I will unmute you, or you can just, let me change my view right quick, or just type something in the chat. Okay, let's see. Yeah, yes, you're unmuted. Galaxy 8, you don't have your name up, so.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Hi everyone, my name is Lorid. I work at Utopia Dining Elevated. I just wanted to ask regarding the Pinot Noir. Actually, it's actually one of my favorite varietal that I really like. And how do you relate your Pinot Noir to Burgund style?
Chris, did you get that? He wanted to know, how do you relate your Pinot, how do you compare it to Burgundy style Pinot Noirs? Is that your question? How does it compare?
Yeah.
So it was Lawrence. I think you said your name was Lawrence.
Yeah, that's true.
Lawrence, it's a question that comes up frequently. You know, our wines are definitely targeted as being traditional, more so than modern in style. We often get likened to Burgundy, but I have to make it clear that we are not Burgundy. We're not trying to be them. We learn obviously from them quite a bit because they are the front runners, and some of the greatest wines in the world are made in Burgundy. But we have our own style and our own way of doing things. But we often get likened to stylistically to Burgundy, and we are traditional in our efforts, as I mentioned. So first up there is our high density plantings in the vineyard. So it starts in the vineyard. We're trying to create the competition and the concentration. And I think that's the important, or the key word there is the concentration actually happens in the vineyards. And we achieve that through our inter-vine competition. So we plant the vines very closely together, about 7,000 vines per hectare. And this creates what I call a bonsai effect, where the plant is restricted by its neighbors. So the root zone that it can fill restricts the vine, and it creates a much smaller plant with less fruit per vine and higher fruit concentration. So we typically look at no more than 1 kilogram of fruit per vine. That is the way. We don't actually speak of tons per hectare or hectoliters per hectare, but we speak of kilograms per vine or grams per vine. And then in the cellar, we use French oak, which are incidentally from Burgundy as well. The Coopers are from Burgundy. So they understand the varietal, they understand what we're trying to achieve. And we have a very good relationship with them too, where they come out and taste our wines from their barrels. And then depending on what needs to be adjusted, whether it be toasting, or even the size of the barrels. We've also experimenting with 450 liter barrels opposed to the traditional 228 liter piece. So I don't know if I'm really answering your question, but we take the best from what Burgundy has to offer and what other parts of the world also has to offer, which are probably more in line with our climate and our soils. But in the end of the day, you have to look at what the conditions and the fruit that is in front of you. And I think that is what the Burgundians have started a long time ago, and which they have mastered, is to analyze their conditions, their plant material, their fruit profiles, and really try and coax that into something that is of very high quality.
All right.
Great
Thank
question.
you. One more, what I was going to ask you one more thing, because I believe Pinot Noir, we use bicarbonation maceration to reduce the tannins. Do you apply any of these?
You're asking about maceration to reduce tannins. Am I understanding you correctly?
Exactly.
We actually yes and no. Yes and no. So we don't do a very long, so you get two forms of maceration. You get a pre-fermentation cold maceration, and that is mostly for color extraction, or it's mostly used for color extraction, anthocyanins. And then you get a post-ferment extraction, which I think where you after more, and that is to a certain extent it can be used to increase your tannin structure. But then if you continue with that for a long time, it actually, your tannins start to polymerize and you start losing tannins again. And I think we in that, it depends on the vintage, Lawrence. It depends on, very much depends on the vintage and the extraction that you've already achieved through fermentation, and the berry size. And also the amount of whole bunch that we incorporate in our ferments, because that's also something that we play around a lot with. But typically we on skins for anything between 12 to 20 days is very much where we found is a sweet spot for us. So you'd be 1 or 2 days from crush until fermentation starts. Fermentation is typically about 8 days. So you would be at least a week to 10 days post-ferment on skins, which can be regarded as a maceration period. So yes, we do post-macerate fermentation to increase some, to build on some of that tannins that you've already extracted during fermentation, but not excessively, no. Or not to reduce, the idea is not to reduce tannins, because you'll have to go up to a month if you really want your tannins to start polymerizing and dropping out.
All right. Because the reason why I asked about the tannins, because it happens that you're one of the wineries in SA which works with Italian varietals, which known as heavy tannins, bold, like you work with Sangiovese, Nebbiolo, Barbera, which is also quite rare to blend them. Even in Italy, they don't even blend Sangiovese, Barbera, and Nebbiolo together. But anyway, that was the reason why I asked about it. But I hope at the end we're gonna also talk about the braveness of blending such varietals together, you know. But I hope at the end you're gonna also reflect on that or explain a little bit. And yeah, we just wanna know more on that aspect as well.
No, sure. Hopefully there's time, but if not, then you and I can always, you know, hook up and we can chat about those interesting varietals and blending them, because it's something that's quite relevant at this stage. We're looking at blending the 2019 Hannibal, so it's something that is very in my mind at this stage. So even if we don't have the time, we can hook up a bit later.
Okay, we had another question in the chat from Andre from France. He wanted to know, how long can we keep your Pinot Noir? So how long can you lay the Pinot Noirs from Bouchard down, generally? Well,
our Pinots are known for their longevity, and the style that we make our wines are well structured, they are muscular. So the intention is always to make wines that are that mature well. But then, you know, you have the catch-22 today where people want to drink the wine this week on release, but they also want to keep it for 10 years. It's a bit of a difficult one. But it depends on two things, really. It depends on the vintage, where certain vintages are more prone to good aging. And then also it depends on the person itself, where where some people prefer more primary fruit on their wines, and others don't mind tertiary flavors, or actually are rewarded by tertiary flavors, developmental characteristics in wine, where the wine it turns more musty and showing more of the forest floor characteristics. So it depends on the person itself and also on the vintage, but rule of thumb, at least 10 years. Safely 10 years, I think the wines will reward you, if cellared correctly, easily 10 years.
All right. Now, can we talk now about the queen of white wine, Chardonnay? So
Yes,
can you talk a little bit about your Chardonnay styles? I know that you have two basic styles that you make, very lean, stainless steel style, and then a very rich, full body oak Chardonnay. So can you just tell us a little bit about Chardonnay?
Yes, sure, Tuanni. And again, giving the wine a personality helps with understanding the varietal. And here, Chardonnay, I would liken to a wealthy homemaker. I think homemaker is the PC for housewife nowadays, where the wine requires both attention and tension. Attention more so in the vineyards, where it's a varietal that you have to keep your hand on in the vineyard, and tension more so in the winery, where I refer with tension, I refer to the acidity, salinity, that freshness that is always a hallmark of great Chardonnay. So yes, two styles. We have two wooded Chardonnays. The one is made exclusively from grapes grown on the estate, and the other one is made exclusively from purchased fruit, which we have a very long-standing relationship with the grower. That is the Crocodile's Lair Chardonnay, or Kaimansgat, which actually predates our own fruit in the cellar. So we've been working with that vineyard for more than 20 years. And then a combination of those two, we also produce an unwooded Chardonnay, which is actually a lot harder to produce than one would expect. Unwooded Chardonnay is not really an easy wine to produce if not made from good grapes.
And why is that? Is it because you have to play around with the acidity, or why is the one made and aged in stainless steel a little bit more difficult than the oak?
Well, the thing is, Chardonnay has very little varietal character, and if you don't have good concentration, or if you're overcropping your vineyards, the wines tend to be insipid and lean and lacking a character, which is often filled by the oak. So in that sense, you know, there's often a cavity in the wine that needs filling, if not produced from outstanding fruit. We work quite extensively with the fermentation lees on all of our unwooded whites. So the unwooded Chardonnay, the Sambrique, would spend up to 6 months on the primary fermentation lees. We don't stir the lees, we don't practice bâtonnage, but the fine lees contact with the wine releases a lot of the manna proteins, which builds the palate and makes up for the lack of oak use.
So what would you say the characteristics are of Chardonnay, though? Like, how would you describe the flavor profile or the aroma profile for Chardonnay? Because I remember I went one time and I tasted at this winery, and I literally smelled a little bit of banana. And so the winemaker was kind of like, banana, and I think he was a little offended by that. But I mean, it didn't smell bad, it just smelled like fresh banana.
Yes. I think
so what would you say?
I think it depends. It's quite a versatile varietal, Chardonnay. I mean, if you think it's made anything from base wine for sparkling wine, still wines, even fortifieds or stickies. So Chardonnay is quite diverse in its use. It's also grown very widely. I stand corrected, but I think it's the most widely planted white varietal in the world. so it's obviously got a lot of applications in different growing regions, but I can speak from the fruit that I have experience with, and we work, like I've mentioned before, with this Crocodile's Lair Kaimasgat vineyard, which is about 100 kilometers away, but climatically very different to the fruit that we grow here in the Hemel en Aarde, and that totally affects the profile of the wines, where the Crocodile's Lair is much more citrus based flavor profile, lime, and the fruit that we grow here is much more stone fruit, a little bit more floral, and showing quite a spicy edge. So I think the growing conditions does affect the fruit profile of the wines. But once again, coming back to the tension that I spoke about, I think a good acidity is really critical in a good Chardonnay, where Chardonnay, if it lacks that precision, the wine can turn flabby very, very easily.
Can you talk, our last class meeting, we were talking about malolactic fermentation. And can you talk about, like, if you guys use that fermentation at Bouchard, when it's used, how it's used, what it does to the wine?
Yes, certainly. So malolactic fermentation, just very basically to recap, is obviously the conversion of malic acid to lactic acid, and this is a bacterial conversion. CO2 is one of the byproducts, and there are other byproducts of the malolactic fermentation, some positive and some negative. But it's a form of stabilization, where your acids are actually, where lactic acid is more stable than malic acid, but it's also a less acidic acid. So you're actually losing acidity by this conversion of malic acid to lactic acid. We practice on all of our red wines and most of the wooded Chardonnays. So once again, it depends on the vintage. Some vintages we don't do full malolactic fermentation. And of late, the last 3 or 4 vintages, we averaging around 70 to 80% malolactic fermentation on our wooded whites, on the Michele and the Crocodile's Lair, where our unwooded whites, Sauvignon Blanc and the Sambury Blanc de Mer, we prevent the malolactic fermentation by the addition of sulfur and the reduction of the temperature.
So the malolactic fermentation happens naturally?
Yes, it can, not under all conditions. Ours, we are fortunate that mostly it happens naturally. So it's a bacteria that is, or various bacteria, strains of bacteria that allows this fermentation. So mostly it's Unococcus, which is the most beneficial. It's got the least, it produces the least off flavors and the least trouble, acetic acid and the likes during the process. But Unococcus and Lactobacillus are 2 other bacterial strains that can also convert malic acid to lactic acid, but with more non-beneficial side effects.
Okay, makes sense. Oh gosh, I do Chardonnay. Chardonnay is so like intense. They grow it all over the world, and you can talk about it all day, I feel like. But let's move on to the next one. Let's move on to Riesling, another very diverse white wine. Can you talk about what you guys are doing with Riesling over at Bouchard and some of the characteristics of Riesling?
Yes, certainly. Our Riesling, I have to point out firstly, is a component in a blend. And so we view it obviously from that point of view. We don't bottle Riesling as a single cultivar. So it forms about typically around 60% of the Blanc de Mer. So it is the frame essentially of the Blanc de Mer. And And we harvest it fairly early, and we harvest it for its acidic properties. It does, over time, with development in bottle, give some of the kerosene characteristics that is typical of the varietal, but it's blended with the Viognier, which is picked very late, and gives a lot more fullness and floral aspects to the blend. And then those two varietals essentially form the basis of the Blanc de Mer, and then the Chardonnay is the glue that brings the two together, the middleman, if you like.
What would you say the blend is like? Is it like 50% Chardonnay and then like 25 and 25 for the Riesling and for the Viognier? Or
no, it's mostly Riesling. So it's at least 60% of the blend is typically Riesling.
Okay.
And then about 20% typically Viognier, that is a purchased component, and then around 10 to 15% of Chardonnay. So the majority of the wine, 75 to 80% of the wine are the two aromatic varietals, which really drive the style. The Riesling more from a frame, from a acidic point of view, as I mentioned. But it's got some aromatic properties as well. But the aromatics are mostly driven by the Viognier, especially initially in the first couple of years of the blend. But I find Riesling a very interesting varietal. It's quite a pleasure to grow. It's not as finicky as Pinot Noir and Chardonnay in the vineyards. And the natural acidity, especially in South Africa, is something that a lot of winemakers approve of or appreciate. But it's a difficult varietal under our climatic conditions. I think the guys in Elgin do a great job. I think there's some great examples of single cultivar Riesling coming from there, and even in some other pockets. But it's really a varietal. I think if you want to do it well, it demands a cooler site to retain some of that natural acidity.
Very cool. I can't wait to taste it. I can't wait till this lockdown is over with. Are you guys actually taking orders during the lockdown? So like if I wanted to order wine now for delivery later, could people do that?
I think we can certainly be in contact, and we can jot you down. At this stage, we are prevented from sales in South Africa.
Okay.
But I mean, taking an order is one thing. It's just that we can't guarantee when you will see your wines, but we certainly won't forget you. So if you want to place an order, we'll happily receive your email. But at this stage, we can only focus on exports.
Nice. Okay, so I think we're going to open it up. That was so informative. I have a lot of questions. I still have a lot more questions, but I will open it up for other people who have questions. I think Carol had a question. Carol, I unmuted you, so if you want to ask your question, you can. Oh, wait, I thought I unmuted you. Hold on for one. No, you're...
It's okay. I've done it. Thank you. Hi, Chris. Thank you so much for the information. It's really, really interesting. One of the questions that I've had for a while concerning malolactic fermentation, and I've wanted to ask a winemaker, is because of the reduction in acidity, how does it affect the wine's ageability in the bottle?
Carol, that's a very interesting question. Thank you so much. That would depend on your starting acidity, obviously. So a lot of winemakers would actually, even when you start sampling the vineyards, prior to picking the grapes, you have to start thinking about this. And some vintages, acidities are higher than others. Personally, especially the varietals that I look at potentially going through malolactic fermentation, I look at the percentage of malic acid versus total acidity. And if that falls in a certain bracket for that vintage, then I know I can at least consider malolactic fermentation. But you have to keep your eye on the levels of your starting out level of acidity. And, you know, acidification is something that is also very contentious. and often discussed, and I think to a certain extent misunderstood, because I think acidification at the right time, if needed, it's much more beneficial than saying, listen, our approach is totally natural and we don't acidify, and therefore we would rather bottle the product as it is than having acidified at the right time with the right form of acid, because there are also various forms of acids that you can add. And one thing that we do, which is a form of acidification really, but it's not out of a bag, is we typically harvest a portion of our Chardonnays fairly early, and that is the portion that we ferment in amphora. So we use that, we prevent that from going through malolactic fermentation. Typically it's lower in alcohol and higher in acidity than most of our batches of Chardonnay would be. And then post-fermentation, we would assess all the batches and have a look at how much acidity do we have available, what are the wines looking at, and what percentage we want to allow malolactic fermentation to progress. And then we can backblend with some of that higher acidity stuff later, prior to bottling, when we make up our blend. I mean, essentially it's a single cultivar that's grown on the estate, but it's still a blend because it's got components, it's got building blocks of different vineyards, different picking dates, and different oaking regimes. But that's also one way that we allow, but it depends. It's a difficult question to ask, but yes, it would influence your ageability, but that depends whether you've actually allowed for it and planned for malolactic fermentation to happen.
Good question, Carol.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions? Nope, don't be shy. It's not every day you get to talk to an actual winemaker from an award-winning winery. All right, so if no one else has any questions, then we will just thank Chris for coming. Chris, this was so awesome. Thank you so much for coming. That was so much information. I loved it, and I'm super excited to taste your wines. I've tasted the Pinot Noir. I haven't tasted the white wine blend yet, so I'm super excited about that one.
No, thank you for having me, and it was my first time doing this, so thanks for bearing with me. And if anybody's got any further questions or something comes up later, I am available on email. So I don't know how we should go about it, but you can share my email address and I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah,
or
I'll share it right now in the text, in the chat. So let's see. I'll send it to everyone in the chat. And
I do have one question, Chris. Thanks for this presentation, but if you would have to suggest one of your wines for someone to taste, they only had time to taste one of your wines, which one would it be? What's your favorite?
how do I pronounce your name? Is it Anne?
Ain.
Ain.
Ain like champagne.
Thank you for the question. And that is a difficult question because wine is a very personal thing, but it's got to be Pinot Noir.
Okay.
It's got to be Pinot Noir. We produce 2 Pinot Noirs, the Galpin Peak, which is our standard production Pinot Noir. And then we also have the Tete Cuvée, which is a barrel selection that we only bottle in exceptional vintages. But I think the wine that reflects this estate best, on which the reputation of the estate is most built, it would be the Galpin Peak.
Okay.
Pinot Noir.
Wonderful. Great, because I'm a big fan of Pinot Noir, so I'm gonna have to come back. I was at Bouchard in November, and it was fabulous tasting. But
I would recommend the Pinot Noir too.
So.
Yeah, I would recommend one of the Pinots too, just because you don't get Pinot often in South Africa. You know, there's not every single winery is doing Pinot Noir. So when you find a good Pinot Noir, it's really a pleasure. And I'm so sad because I have no Pinot in my house right now.
It's a bad time not to have Pinot.
It's a shame. All right, so I put Chris's email in the group chat so you guys can all just jot that down. It's really easy. It's chris@bouchardfinlayson.co.za.
Oh, yeah. How do you pronounce it correctly? Like, how would you pronounce the full name? Bouchard. That's easy for me because French, but.
Yes, obviously one of the founding members was Paul Bouchard from Bouchard Fils. So the correct pronunciation, international pronunciation would be Bouchard Finlayson, but we pronounce it Bouchard Finlayson.
Okay.
Alrighty. Okay, so everyone is unmuted. You guys can all say your goodbyes. Thank you so much, Chris, for joining us. I appreciate it. Make sure you check out their website when you have a chance. Please check out their wines. It's a real pleasure to have their wines if you're able to.
Join the meeting.
Thanks for organising.
You're welcome.
Thank you,
You
Chris.
guys have a good one. And if you want to stay for the study group, you're more than welcome to stay for the study group. We're just going to cover the grapes a little bit more detail per WSET study book. And Chris, you're more than welcome to stay if you want to as well.
Thank you so much. It's a great initiative, and thank you for your support.
Have a good one.
Thank you. Be able to join me.
Thanks.
With a name.
Bye, thank you.
All right. So everyone, we're going to finish studying. So if you're able to take one, I'm going to mute everyone for a second just because it's a little loud. And then I'm going to get my book out.
Tuanni, I have to run again for my class.
Okay. Have fun. Thank you so much for coming. I'm
studying. Bye, guys. Another great session. Bye.
Bye-bye. All right. So let's see. So this chapter, if you guys have the WSET book, this chapter that we're covering, it was perfect that they specialize in Chardonnay and Pinot Noir and Riesling because those are actually the chapters that we're going to cover. And Pinot Noir is a little bit intense. I actually have these study cards that I want to get for you guys because they're really fun to use. You guys just hold on for 1 second, all right? You guys can talk about Pinot Noir while I go get these cards because they're really easy. So I'm back. Sorry about that. So everybody knows that Pinot Noir originated in Burgundy, right? It's home of Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir is a really finicky grape just because the skins of it are so thin. Even when you just like hold a vine up and you look at it, you can see how like transparent they are almost. I have to run up the stairs. Sorry, I gotta catch my breath. All right. So, Pinot Noir, when you talk about the color, so like, let's just go over how it looks first of all. It's a black grape or a red wine grape. The color, you would say that it was pale, just because when you hold it in the glass, it's transparent. It's not as intense as say a Shiraz or a Zinfandel. It's low to medium tannins. So out of all the red wines, Pinot Noir is gonna have the least amount of tannins usually. What else? It's high in acidity, which is pretty cool because that's something that you should know about Pinot Noir. It's usually high in acidity. And what else? It likes cool climates, like Chris said. So that's all the characteristics: black skin, thin skin grape, cool to moderate climate. The flavor profiles are going to be strawberry and raspberry, so more of like your red fruits. And then you can make it in a number of different ways. You can make it still, champagne, of course, rosé, of course. When it ages, it gets these aromas of like mushrooms and forest floor. And sorry, I keep looking at my book because I'm just going over the notes in the book. Important regions for Pinot Noir. Of course, it's going to be Burgundy. It's going to be Burgundy, California, New Zealand. But let's just talk about Burgundy, right? Because Burgundy is the most important region. And literally, Burgundy, we can use this whole hour to talk about Burgundy. But I made these things, they're really cool. They're like note cards, and I know we can't all like run out to the store and get index cards. So I just use like my old wine boxes to cut up note cards. And usually I just lay them all on the table, and then I just kind of do like this word association. So like, for example, gosh, I think they're all mixed up, so I might not be able to use them today because they're all mixed up with the Rhone Valley. Oh man. All right, so anyway, we'll just continue with our study. So we're talking about Burgundy, so France. So when you have Burgundy, you have different kinds of levels. So you have Burgundy AOC, you have village wines. I'm sure somebody with the French accent could say that a lot better, village. Village wines, you have Premier Cru and Grand Cru wines. And so that's what you have in France Burgundy, right? So your Burgundy wines are gonna be young and fresh. They don't, it's called Bourgogne. Somebody can say it right. Who can say it better? Nobody? Okay, you guys know what I'm talking about though, right? All right, so those are gonna be your young, your fresh wines. Those are usually gonna be like inexpensive wines. And we're talking about Burgundy, we're talking about like the AOC, right? So like the area that they assign to this. So those, if they have that on the label, those are gonna be your least expensive wines. And then you have the village wines, the village wines. And these wines are a little bit more up in quality. They typically are situated on slopes, and they have well-drained soil. So these are gonna be your better quality wines. So you have Bourgognian, and then you have village wines, and then you have Premier Cru. So imagine if you had a pyramid, right? And so at the bottom would be your Bourgognian wines, and then the next level would be your village wines, and then at the very top of the pyramid, that's when you're gonna have your Premier Cru and your Grand Cru wines, which are age-worthy wines, which are better quality. These are like the highest quality wines. The fruits are gonna be concentrated. The vines usually are always on slopes. They come from very good areas. This is where you're gonna get the more complex flavors. So you're not gonna get just simple fruit flavors like raspberries and strawberries. You're gonna start to get more like baking spices, like cloves. What else about them? So they're age-worthy, they have more concentrated fruit, more complex fruit aromas, and they're just higher quality. So there's 3 different categories for French wines, for French Burgundy wines. And then the next region is gonna be California, right? So, well, not California, but the USA. There's more to the USA than just California. And California is one of the largest wine regions. And so in California, you're gonna get Pinot Noirs mostly from Sonoma Coast, Napa Valley, Caneros, which is a city that's actually shares a border between Napa and Sonoma, but it's a cooler region. So people typically think of California as a warm climate, and it is warm climate, but this particular area, Caneros, is cooler, and that's where you're gonna get the Pinot Noir, and you get the influence of the Pacific Ocean. Santa Barbara County is good for Pinot Noir as well. And the Pinot Noir that comes from California, typically it's gonna be more ripe fruit. So it's gonna be ripe strawberries, ripe cherries. It might even be a little bit cooked. If you go further south, like Santa Barbara County, it might be a little bit more like overly ripe, like cooked flavors. And then the next place in the United States that makes Pinot Noir, and actually this is my favorite place, is Oregon. So Oregon makes the best Pinot Noir. I would say if you've ever had a chance to taste a Pinot Noir from the States, get one from Willamette Valley, Oregon, because it's going to be true to a Burgundy style Pinot Noir. Of course, it's Oregon, it's the United States, so it has its own flavor profile and style, but it's going to be more earthy in tone. You're going to get more mushrooms, more dried fruit. But Oregon, and it's northern, it's north of California, so it's a cooler climate. Yeah, but that's what it, so in California, in the United States, you're gonna have California, you're gonna have Oregon. And then Chile is another region that's very popular for Pinot Noir. So in Chile, you have the Casablanca Valley, and that's where most of the Pinot Noir comes from. You get the influence from the Pacific Ocean again. What else? You get more cooked strawberries in this region. So just think about it, it's a cooler region, but it's further south. So you still get like that sun, that ripeness, overly ripe fruit, cooked fruit. But yeah, Casablanca Valley in Chile. And then South Africa is also one of the regions that they name for Pinot Noir. And Walker Bay is a region that they note for Pinot Noir in South Africa. Australia, I do remember seeing this on the test when I took the test, and I was like, what? But Australia is a region where they're gonna have Pinot Noir, and the regions that they're gonna have it in Australia are gonna be the Yarra Valley, Mornington Peninsula. Let's see, what else does it say? Yeah, so it's gonna be more cooked red fruit, red plum, strawberry, and medium tannins. And then New Zealand. New Zealand is the last region that they note in the book for Pinot Noir. So in Pinot Noir from New Zealand, you're gonna get, let's see, you have the two regions. You have Martinborough and you have Marlborough, which is really confusing, but just think of the two boroughs. So you have Martinborough and you have Marlborough for the Pinot Noir. And then you have Central Ortega. So those are the three regions that you're gonna have in New Zealand, and I think that you should really memorize that because I do remember seeing that on the test, these silly regions, small regions. But yeah, so that's it for, oh gosh, that's it that they have for Pinot Noir. Let's talk about, so I didn't even need all my new, these note cards are actually when you just want to talk about just Burgundy only anyway. So I'm gonna put these to the side. We don't need these note cards right now. All right. But let's talk about Chardonnay. So let me go. And that was chapter 6 in the WSET book. So if you guys have the book, you guys should just go back and read through it, because the whole point of the study group is to help with the test if you haven't taken the test, or if you have taken the test like me, just to kind of memorize the stuff. But let's talk about Chardonnay. Let me go to that chapter. Any questions so far? Does anybody have anything to add? Oh yeah, Monica, you tasted the Oregon Pinot Noirs, right? Delicious. Let's see. I thought I had, okay, let's see. I'm almost there, just bear with me. Pinot Noir. Thibaut, Zinfandel, we talked about Zinfandel. Riesling, here we go. Okay, so Riesling, like Chris mentioned, Riesling is one of these grapes that needs like a cooler region, right? So Riesling likes cold weather just because Riesling is known for being high in acid, so it's a very acidic grape. And you get that acidity from the colder regions. But let's see, characteristics. It's fruity, it's acidic, it's aromatic. So if somebody asks you to name one of the aromatic white wines, Riesling is definitely one of them. I'm into everybody. Okay, everybody's unmuted. Let's see. It's acceptable to botrytis, noble rot, which is perfect because it makes really great dessert wines. So it's ageable because of the acidity, because of the acidity. It's dry to sweet, light to full body.
Moi, tu veux que je te fasse du boulgour à la méditerranéenne? Hein? Ah, tu veux pas? Non, mais je te demande si tu veux que je te fasse du boulgour.
I'm gonna mute everybody because somebody had their phone on. I'm not sure who that was. Okay, so let's see. You can freeze it so you can get ice wine from Riesling. And the flavor profile is green fruit, apple, pear, citrus, like lemon and lime, extra ripe flavors. Extra ripe, like grapes, give you more like dried stone fruits, like peach, apricot, tropical fruits like mango and pineapple. So yeah, so that's the characteristics of Riesling. And then, let's see. I'm just gonna add, okay. And then let's see. We talked about how you can age it. Important regions. So like, I feel like the most important region, like the region that does Riesling so well is going to be Germany, right? And so in Germany, you have a couple cool, important regions like in Germany, right? So of course you have the Moselle, and it's the most northerly latitude of all the wine regions in Germany. It has steep slopes. There are south-facing, southeast-facing slopes right off of the Moselle River. So what happens with the slope, because it faces the sun, so it gets all the sun during the day. And then Germany is a colder region, so gets all this sun, and then it's able to like collect all the heat and then release the heat at night, so the grapes don't freeze. So that's why that is important, the Moselle region, and that's why it makes such good Rieslings. And then the Rheingau, I know I'm saying this wrong, guys. You guys have to excuse me. In America, we only speak one language. The Rheingau, so the Rheingau, let's see. It also has steep south-facing slopes on the north bank of the River Rhine. These wines have more body than the ones from the Moselle. So the Moselle, just think about it. If it's further north, then it's gonna be cooler, which is going to make thinner bodied wines, like thinner wines. But as you go a little bit further south, then you're gonna get more full bodied wines. So these have a little bit more body than the ones in the Moselle, because the Moselle is typically super high. So these are dry, medium bodied. The Rhine River is like what influences them a lot. And then the next one you have is the, oh my gosh, somebody help me out. It's spelled P-F-A-L-Z. Pfalz, do you not say the P? Pfalz? I'm gonna unmute everybody. Who knows how to say that? Pfalz?
I think you got it right.
Could you spell it again?
Yeah, it's P-F-A-L-Z. Pfalz.
Yeah, false.
Pfalz. Pfalz, yes. I have my little Southern American accent coming out. Okay, so that one is going to be medium bodied as well. It has a longer growing season. And let's see, the mountains to the west, that's right. So basically it's just saying that they're dry and medium bodied. So I think the most important region is gonna be the Moselle for Germany. And then you have France, of course, because France is always a really important region. So in France, the region that's known for Riesling is really easy. It's Alsace. Alsace, however you say it, A-L-S-A-C-E, Alsace, A-O-C. It's near the Vosges Mountains. It has the driest and sunniest wine producing region in France. So the growing season is very long, and probably because it doesn't rain as much, so probably just takes its time just ripening. And they produce.
Can you mute Galaxy for us?
Repeat what?
Can you mute the Galaxy phone for us so we can hear you?
Oh, is that who's making all the noise? Thank you. Okay, done. All right, and so let's see. So the flavor profiles: ripe citrus and stone fruits, vibrant blossoms aromas, medium bodied with high acidity. So I think it's key to just realize all of them are saying high acidity, high acidity. And then when it ages in the bottle, it ages very well, and then you get honey and you get dried fruit. And then when it's labeled, the vines that are labeled Vendange Tardives, somebody, Vendange Tardives, Vendanges. We talked about that last time because remember it was on the quiz that we took, Tardives. So that's basically late harvest, and that's what they're known for in Alsace, is the late harvest Riesling. All right, so let's see. And then the last one. So they named 3 important regions. They named Germany, France, and then Australia as important areas for Riesling. So Riesling in Australia is going to come from Eden Valley and Clare Valley because they have higher altitudes in Australia. So Australia is usually very warm, so the higher altitudes are going to be these 2 areas, and they produce dry style Riesling with aromas of lime, peach blossoms, and petrol. So you'll get that kerosene, that gasoline, which is a characteristic of Riesling. How many people have ever smelled that in a Riesling? I have, especially aged ones. All right, so that's it for Riesling. Another quick chapter. Now I'm just gonna find the chapter for Chardonnay. Here we go. Yes, okay. All right, so Chardonnay, let me let Mo back in. Okay, there we go. Hey Mo, welcome back. Sorry about that. All right, so we've moved on to Chardonnay. In general, Chardonnay likes cool, moderate, and warm climates. I call it the queen of white wine because a lot of people do, because it's grown all over the world. Like almost every city, every wine country that you go to, they're gonna have Chardonnay. It's a dry white wine usually. It can be inexpensive or it can be expensive. Chardonnay, it just depends on the climate, like Chris had said, where it's grown, right? He used a really good example because they have Chardonnays from 2 different regions, the ones that they grow at Bouchard and then another one that they grow at another wine farm. But if it's a cool climate, the Chardonnay is going to be very high in acidity. It's going to be light to medium bodied in flavors. You're going to have flavors of green fruits, green apple, pear, citrus fruits like lemon and lime, wet stones. And I think that this is very key because I think that Chardonnay picks up like the terroir a lot. And then in a typical, like if it's going in a medium to moderate climate, the Chardonnay is going to be medium bodied. It's going to be high in acidity, medium to full body. The flavors are going to be lemon, stone fruits like peach, and sometimes tropical fruits like melon. And then you have Chardonnay from a warm climate, kind of like Chardonnay from California. It's going to be full body, medium in acidity, dominant flavors of stone fruit, peach, tropical flavors like pineapple and banana. So I think you get that same flavors for the most part in South Africa, because a lot of South African Chardonnays that I've smelled, especially from like Stellenbosch, I smell a lot of banana. Not a lot, but like a hint of like fresh banana and pineapples. All right, so they talk about in the book malolactic fermentation, which he covered, and I think we are all experts on malolactic fermentation now. We know that it's a bacteria fermentation. We are so good on that, so we don't have to talk about that. They usually age it in oak. Sometimes it's aged in stainless steel though. Important regions are gonna be Burgundy, France, and again, you have the Bourgogne region, which is the ALC, which is gonna be at the bottom of the pyramid. And then you have Chablis, which is another AOC. And then you have Côte d'Or, you have Mâconnais, you have the south of France, and all of these make different styles. So in the Bourgogne, remember that's gonna be your like least expensive Chardonnays. And then Chablis This is actually a village appellation, so it's going to be a little bit higher quality. High acidity, Chablis usually is. They also have some Premier Cru and some Grand Cru in this AOC. And then you have Côte d'Or, which is gonna be more moderate, like that fruit flavors are ripe, but they're like moderately ripe. You have peach, melon. It's not gonna be as acidic as the Chablis. It's gonna be more rounded. And let's see. Then you have Maconnais. Maconnais is a sub-region in the south of Burgundy. So just think about it, you're going further south now. So you take Burgundy and you're going south. And so what happens when you go south? It's gonna get warmer, right? So like when you're in the Northern Hemisphere, it gets warmer when you go south. So then you're gonna have more tropical fruit flavors. You're gonna have more full-bodied wines, concentrated fruits. And then you have the USA. So then you have California, which is known for Chardonnay. I think California is known for like overly malolactic fermentation wines, but I'm not gonna be hard on California because we make them really great now. That was probably that was the 80s. But again, Caneros, Sonoma is a region known for their Chardonnay, Napa Valley, of course, Santa Barbara County. So pretty much the same ones that you have for Pinot Noir. It's gonna be Sonoma, Napa Valley, Santa Barbara County, with Caneros being a key city for the Chardonnay, and then Oregon again. And I think because these regions that they're talking about, or these microclimates, have the same microclimates as Burgundy in France. So Oregon is another region that they mentioned. And then Australia, they just mentioned you have a lot of Chardonnay from southeastern Australia. Sorry, I'm trying to let Nick in right now. Okay. Any questions so far about Chardonnay? No? All right. So Yarra Valley, Margaret River, and then they talk about New Zealand Chardonnay. Of course, Marlborough, they named that one, and Hawke's Bay. And then Chile, Casablanca. So again, you'll see in a pattern with like the Pinot Noirs, it's pretty much the same regions in each country. And I think just because it seems like whenever somebody's growing Pinot Noir, they're growing Chardonnay at the same time. And then for South Africa, they just mentioned, it's so funny, they just say the Western Cape, which is like all of wine country for the most part, the Western Cape, and then they do specifically name out Walker Bay, just like the Pinot Noir. And then that's it for Chardonnay. So if you guys have any more questions? No questions about the Pinot Noir or the Chardonnay? All right, well, cool then. Yes.
Sorry, Tuanni. It was something that in hindsight, I forgot to ask Chris. It's a trend in South Africa, and whether or not it's a global one too, I'm not 100% sure. I know in Champagne region in France, they do blend the Pinot Noir and the Chardonnay when they make their champagne. And we do the same here in South Africa with our MCCs. But in terms of table wine, there are a lot of farms that do blend the Chardonnay and the Pinot Noir into a sort of type of rosé. I know Haute Cabrera in Franschhoek do.
Yeah.
I meant to ask, yeah, and I meant to, Graham Beck does as well with Gorgeous. And I meant to ask Chris whether they do much of that. And is it vintage dependent as to whether or not they blend the Pinot Noir and Chardonnay? And do they do the Blanc de Noir, or do they keep it as a rosé? It was just something to think about.
That is, I'm not that familiar with their wine list, but do they have sparkling wines at Bouchard?
No, so generally the Chardonnay and the Pinot Noir would be blended in Champagne, but a lot of
Do you mean for still wine? Do you mean for his still wines? Oh, okay. Yeah, you know what? I will. That's a question to ask him. I'll ask him because I can just email him. I have his email already in my system. But I don't think that they do. Like when I saw that at Haute Cabri, I was just like so amazed that they had a still wine that was a blend of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And it's delicious too. I love it. And it's not even a rosé. Yeah, I love that wine. And it's very unique, but I haven't really seen that happen at any other, I haven't seen that happen at any other wineries. Yeah, but I will ask Chris if they do that.
Thank you.
And get back to you. I'll let you know on Thursday.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Okay, well, cool. Thanks you guys for joining. Thanks for staying in here for the last hour, 20 minutes or so, and have a good one.
Thank you. That's great.
Thank you.
Alrighty, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Have a great one.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Great.
Tuanni. Bye-bye.
Up.
Thank you. I got up today. It was great. Well worth it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Tuanni.
You're welcome.